Let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Haishan Fu, the director of World Bank's Development Data Group. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this session of the World Data Forum, from Cape Town to Bern, the data governance revolution. We have with us today an amazing panel of experts from around the world to discuss data governance, a rapidly evolving concept in a fast-changing data world. In many ways, data governance has become a hot button issue of our time that require us to learn fast, to adapt quickly, but more important, to work together to form consensus on what should guide us and how to collaborate to proactively manage the risk while maximizing the value of data for greater development impact. For our discussion today, we brought together representatives from governments, multilateral organizations, and non-governmental organizations to share their insights and experience concerning what effective data governance ought to look like in our practice. What we'll do today is that we'll start with brief presentations from each of our panelists for them to share with us an overview of the key issues of data governance emerging from their own work and experience. Then we'll have a discussion among the panelists to drill down a few targeted questions. For the later part of our session today, we will do a mini workshop. What I mean is that we'll open up to the audience and invite you to pose some questions regarding practical issues that you have encountered in dealing with data governance, and invite our panelists to share their insights and advice. So please do get prepared with your question while listening to our panelists so that we can make the best use of our time towards the end. So let me start by introducing our distinguished panelists in the order of their presentation. Our first panelist is Rory Macmillan, who is a founding partner of Macmillan Keck, an international law firm that has worked in over 126 countries and specializes in areas of law governing ICTs, data protection, and digital ID, among others. Our second panelist is Priya Vora, who is founder and CEO of Future State, a neutral nonprofit initiative of the United Nations Foundation. The Future State advocates for policies and processes that give citizens more rights and control over digital data. Our third panelist is Jenny Tonneson, who is Vice President and Chief Strategy Advisor of the Open Data Initiative, actually Open Data Institute, an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan institute that works with companies and governments to help build an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. Our fourth panelist is Zi-King Yong. Am I pronouncing your name right, Zik? Zik is the Assistant Chief Executive of the Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore, where his responsibilities include the development of governance for AI and data, promoting industry adoption of AI and data analytics, and building AI and data science capacities in Singapore. Last but not least, our fifth panelist is Malar Veerapong, who is my colleague at the World Bank's Development Data Group, a senior data scientist, but who is also currently the manager of the World Bank's 2021 World Development Report, Data for Better Lives. We're really excited to have all of you here today with us. So let's just get into our action. First, let me invite Rory. Could you kick us off discussion with this panel to share some thought with us on the evolution of the data governance concept and what it means for us today? Rory, please.
So imagine a health insurance company that gives you customer bonus points for checking your blood pressure, your blood glucose, cholesterol, weight, your waist circumference, gives you a wearable band device that monitors every step, every heartbeat, gives you more points for the number of steps you take, or takes points away if you don't. It gives you a minimum number of hours of cardio exercise you've got to do. Gives you more points if you do it and takes points away if you don't. It nudges you, reminds you if the week is drawing to a close and you're short of the 3 hours you were supposed to do. Now imagine that health company is also a bank, and so every purchase you use to make using his bank card is monitored. Gives you points if you buy vegetables, takes points away if you buy chocolate. And the amount of points you earn affects the price of your insurance. Imagine prizes are thrown in like 30% off holidays at affiliated hotels. The bank has access not only to the device data on your steps, your heartbeat, but also all your health data. And they can take that into account when they assess your credit score, when you ask them for a loan. So is this South Africa? Is this China? Is this European fintech? Is this British dystopian TV series Black Mirror, if any of you have seen that? Well, this is South Africa's Discovery Bank Vitality Program, which is widespread in the market. Why do I tell you about that? Well, traditionally, data governance was mainly conceived at the level of an organization, the enterprise, for example, or the government department. It looked at the collection of practices and processes to ensure formal management, authority, control, planning, monitoring, enforcement over the data assets. Today, attention's broadened out very much more widely to national and regional policy levels, looking at how data is governed as being strategically important for economic productivity, innovation across the economy. It's key to cross-border service provision, manufacturing supply chains in a globalizing economy, vital for social inclusion, political stability, and of course, vital for privacy and dignity. So what questions are data governance trying to answer in today's much broader vision is looking at what institutions, laws, regulations, agencies, decision-making processes, standards, what should be put in place domestically, regionally, internationally, to provide positive and negative incentives to seize the opportunity of data that's economically efficient, maximizing innovation, productivity, and empowering and protecting people who are the subjects of the data. The goal is not just protection, but actually using the data for healthy productivity. And so making sure governance achieves that is really the priority. And so I think in terms of 5 different layers of data governance, the first at the very base is very non-contentious. It's about security, making sure that the networks and the data is secure. Next then is what data is a gatekeeper sort of question. The conditions on different types of data can be collected, processed, shared in the first place. Lots of restrictions we know on personal data, but also non-personal data comes up. There's machine-to-machine data, there's corporate data, there's data relevant to national security that needs to be limited as to how that's going to be managed. There are all sorts of issues that come up when that data all gets mixed up together. Developing countries face real issues around where should they put the accent on that in protection, particularly of personal data. For instance, is there a trade-off between protection of personal data and allowing services to develop? I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Then as people are interacting, using data to transact, there's a need to identify people, objects as the Internet of Things develops, and entities. And that is key to economic transacting, to make sure data is used to enable those transactions to occur. And in economic development, developing countries need assistance building these digital ID systems, whether for individuals, things, or entities, to enable that kind of transacting to occur. The next layer up, access and markets, how data moves across boundaries, across organizational boundaries, how data is shared, how you make sure it's protected as it crosses borders into other countries. There's a whole range of issues around adequacy of other countries' laws to protect data, use of binding corporate rules on organizations as they commit to protect data in certain ways, using innovative mechanisms like data trusts that I'm sure we're going to hear more about as well, to enable that crossing of data across boundaries. And a vital part of that is what happens as that is consolidated in small number of hands. If data becomes hoarded by companies, and you end up with market power over that sort of data. The last layer, and then I'll close, is how data is then used and processed for actual decision making. It might be public policy making, It might be using algorithms to assess credit worthiness of people, or a number of other decisions, automated decisions. An awful lot of the data governance issues around this layer are about how do you make sure that the systems are actually effective and are not deficient, so they don't have errors or bias in them. So we have today a very wide range of data governance issues, all of which have vital importance for economic development, in particular for lower income countries, middle income countries, as they grow. And with that, I'll close and hand over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rory. This is really important for us to understand how the scope of data governance in terms of the concept and also the range of issues be evolving fast and the challenges we're facing. We will come back to you with some questions so that we can have a deeper discussion. Now, Priya, let's move to you. I know that future state gives priority to the role of individual citizen choices in the use and governance of data. Could you share with us some of the thinking behind this?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be part of this panel. So let me just first set the stage. Data is not oil. It is fundamentally different from traditional assets that we know. The more data can be shared, reshared, and the more potential it has to create value. And that makes it really unlike other factors of production we know. And it allows us to imagine a world where data is much more free-flowing, it's shared across silos, and very different from the world we live in today, where data is concentrated in the hands of a few. And there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this vision of data sharing. When governments have access to more and better data, they can make smarter policy decisions, they can more effectively target public services, companies can understand consumers better and innovate more. And what I really want to talk about is why people need to be considered equal participants in a data sharing world. Why and how to give people control over their data and transparency in how data is shared and used. So let me just start with the why. Why give people control over their data and transparency? And the first most obvious reason is trust. And we're seeing it right now in this time of the pandemic that people are rejecting things like contact tracing apps when they don't have a fundamental understanding of what data is collected, by whom, and how it's being utilized, and how it will be utilized in the future. And that's really a dangerous place for society to be in when people are rejecting digital solutions that are really designed to advance societal goals. And instead we're breeding mistrust in digital solutions and the institutions behind those solutions. And it obviously can lead to civic unrest and worse. But the second reason to care about giving people control and transparency over their data is maybe less obvious and most pertinent to emerging markets. And that is that people, when equipped with access to their data and more transparency over their data, they can actually unlock services to better their lives. So if you have your medical history at your fingertips, you can go to a care provider of your choice and get the care you need from the practitioner you want. Or if you have your social media data and your transaction data, you can become more discoverable to lenders and hopefully get more favorable or more accurate loan terms and really unlock new services, and which is so important for people who are living more in this kind of gray economy. So that's the why. But of course, the million-dollar question is, how do you do that? And it's really thorny, especially when the controls we're so used to right now is really based on consent. And we know why, and why consent is broken. So, how do you fix consent, or how do you fix the system for giving people control? And I'll reference my slide here, and I know we don't have time right now, but hopefully we can get through it in the discussion. But I want to share the kind of 3 top-line conclusions from us at Future State. So the first is that legislation is critically important, but woefully insufficient. Of course, you need to enshrine rights and responsibilities over data in law, but we know that laws can be on the books and meaningless in real life, and it's just not sufficient to think about legislation as the start and end of data protection and data empowerment. The second is that in countries where there are weak institutions, we can imagine more of a techno-legal framework that uses technology architecture to supplement weaker institutional capacity and kind of bake in policies through that. And there are examples around the world, including Singapore, so hopefully we'll hear about that today, where that's being done. And then the third, probably the most important conclusion, is that nobody has gotten this right. We really are at the forefront of how to govern this new strategic asset we call data. And it's just so important for groups like the World Bank to be investing in research and experimentation. And I really couldn't be happier that you're having forums like today. And I'm just delighted to be part of this discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priya, for reminding us as a new form of strategic and productive asset, data have its own distinct features, which has huge implications for how individual right, individual opportunity, and individual participation, and how important it is. And data governance is not just about regulation, but also the wider innovations that we'll need to engage. So now let's move to Jenny. Jenny, ODI is focusing on the role of data institutions, and especially in terms of storing data and on behalf of others to unlock the economic and social values. Share with us some of the thinking that you have been really prioritizing and advocating for.
Thanks so much, Haishan. Yes, so at the Open Data Institute, then we've been focusing on the kinds of institutional setups that you can put in place in order to help with all of the issues that Rory and Priya have been outlining around how to manage data for public good purposes, how to help individuals and groups be empowered around the use of data that is about them. So we've used this term, data institutions, as the kind of catch-all term for a whole range of organisations that basically act as intermediaries between organisations that collect data and hold it, and organisations that need to use that data. And the importance of data institutions is that they, as this intermediary, can have an independence that you don't see in the data collectors or in the data users. And it gives a route for the voice and the interests of the people and communities who are affected by the use of data to have their say about how it should be managed as well. So we cast that net around data institutions fairly broadly. There are data institutions, and many of the kinds of conversations about data trust fall into this kind of category, or data cooperatives sometimes, that hold data on behalf of an organization or a person or a group of organizations and people, and share it with others, third parties, that want to use it for a particular purpose. So that might be researchers who could really benefit from the information that is currently held by banks and retailers and Fitbits and so forth, as was described earlier on. And the range of institutions that are investigated there include ones that really give individual and personal control over the way in which that data might be reused. And hopefully we can come on to discuss the limits and the opportunities there a bit later. The second real role of data institutions we found is that they can provide analyses and insights and other services back to the organizations and the people and the communities that have provided data. So acting as a hub really for that kind of analytics and insights and maybe benchmarking and doing those kinds of roles, which are incredibly important and helpful for making an ecosystem or a sector really flourish. And then the third role that we really think is important, and many of our existing data institutions really sit in this role, is simply maintaining common data infrastructure that we all benefit from. So institutions like mapping agencies, statistics agencies, weather agencies are really, we would class as data institutions that maintain that common data infrastructure that everybody can benefit from. And of course, those types of data institutions are particularly historically maintained by the public sector, but increasingly are becoming commons that are collaboratively maintained. So efforts such as OpenStreetMap, for example, is a collaborative maintained common data infrastructure and data institution. So as we'll come on to then, I'm sure in the questions then, there are real challenges for organizations that act in that kind of institutional capacity, really about sharing data. They need to have very good engagement with the organizations that hold data and those that want to use it. And as I say, the people and communities affected by it. They need to really understand what the impacts are of sharing data so that they can be trustworthy themselves. And there are also real challenges around their sustainability, like what kinds of business models should those, or revenue models should those organizations hold, and how do we stop those revenue models and business models from conflicting with their purpose of unlocking the value that comes from data by sharing it. Alongside, legal innovations and technical innovations, we think that institutional innovations are one of the ways in which we're going to be able to get to a better future around data. But still, as Priya said, so much to do around experimenting with these and understanding when they work and when they don't work, and how we can use them best so that data works for everyone. Thanks, Haishan.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's always great listening to you. And as the World Bank, at the World Bank, we're also constantly looking at how our own role should evolve in this fast changing data ecosystem, and how we can indeed look at, as a data institution, how our own practices and governance need to, further transform, and how we can best support countries and others. So really, thank you very much. And we'll come back to you during our discussion to further explore some of the specifics. Now, let's move to Zeke. Zeke, you're our only country representative here, and you're actually the one leading data governance in action. So we'd love to hear from you some of the Singapore's experience in this regard.
Thanks. Thanks for the invitation and for the opportunity for me to share a bit about the view from both a regulator's perspective, as well as someone who's really looking at how regulation can actually provide that impetus and support, right, for good, responsible data use. Most of the work that we do is around personal data, but what I'm going to say applies to not just personal data, but also applies to other types of data across the board, because what we are talking about is really about data governance, right? And data governance, the way we look at it, is actually implemented in a principle of accountability. And what does that mean? The usual the explanation is how you are accountable to your customers, how you're accountable to regulators, how you're accountable to your business partners even, right? But for us, what we look at it and we essentially summarize it as taking a risk-based approach to identify, manage, monitor, and respond, right, to data risk, right? It is about having those practices in place. And it is about putting all these practices in place in order to ensure that data is used for authorized purposes and used in ways that don't surprise or might turn out to appear creepy, right, to data subjects. So data governance goes beyond just protection, but it goes to making good, responsible decisions when you are using data as well. So sometimes we call that components of it data ethics. Now, having a good data governance within an organization is extremely important these days, especially since the amounts of digital data that is generated and collected by many organizations who have digitalized, especially those who have digitalized, right? It's just increasing at a phenomenal rate, and that's not going to stop. So, how do we ensure that principles like this meet practice? And that's the area that we work in, translating principles into actionable, practical guidance. And a lot of our work are actually encapsulated in guidance that we put out, translating these principles into practices that organizations can adopt. I begin by talking a bit about the accountability guides, right, that we provide to organizations. How do you put in place a management program that ensures that the decisions around data is made at the right level of management, getting the right level of management to be aware that when decisions are made concerning the use of data, or decisions are made around how to protect data or to control the access of data, these are important decisions affecting legal liability, reputational risk, right? And also the relationship that you want to build with business partners and consumers. Getting companies to be aware of that. Introducing practices, right? If you want to make the right decisions, how do you organize and structure yourself? What kind of decision-making structures would be useful? And what are the handy tools like risk assessment, data impact assessments? How do you implement that? When do you do that, right? For example, do you do it regularly? Do you do it ad hoc only when you make massive changes to IT systems or major reorganizations or changes to your processes? So we provide suggestions of when you need to do things like that. And if you are developing IT systems, adopting a data protection by design, ensuring that some of these decisions are made at an early enough stage when you are designing the system, helps make sure that these features are built in, whether it is to prevent unauthorized use, prevent leakage, or to enforce right decision making. Putting these policies and practices in place are important, but I think the other thing that's very vital to do good data governance is building the right culture within the organization. How do we build the culture of sensitivity and awareness amongst staff? And how do we ensure, whether it is through training or a reward system, right, when dealing with members of our staff, that we are promoting the right values and the right kind of conduct and creating that culture so that every member of the staff is active, right, looking out within their own level and scope to make sure that the right decisions are made. We take this to heart. We are very committed to accountability and data governance, and we don't just preach. We don't just say this is what organizations must do. We take that on board and we use it to develop our enforcement policies as well when we take on a regulatory role. I don't want to spend too much time talking about enforcement aspect. That's not the purpose of this, but we have an active enforcement framework that really implements and tries to recognize and incentivize good accountable behaviors in organization. Like I said, this approach permeates what we do. We implement this for data protection, for personal data, and we have also taken these same principles and translated them and implemented them for artificial intelligence. So the model AI governance framework that we have put out earlier last year and the second edition this year takes the same approach and we translate it and provide guidance to companies who want to deploy AI at scale to see how they can adopt these same principles when making decisions about how AI will be introduced to either their operations to assist and augment human decision making or to enhance products and services. The last point I want to talk about is really about the importance of accountability permeating the entire supply chain. It is not it is important for business partners to also observe this. And when it comes to the sharing of data between suppliers or commercial partners, we take the same approach as well. So again, same principles, we translated that and we've introduced a trusted data sharing framework, right? That's the framework that you see on the slide before you. And I'll just end off by sharing very briefly what we hope to achieve with this framework. And it is developed to advocate stronger safeguards and provide clarity, regulatory clarity, which we hope will then send the signal that yes, data sharing can take place and it can take place responsibly. The framework aims to help users to appreciate the benefits of data sharing, provide clarity about the information and or rather gain clarity from the information and illustrations that are presented in the framework to understand the key areas of considerations to enable data sharing and to kickstart their data sharing journey and also develop their own ideas around data sharing. So this is my brief overview about the work that we've done, right, to translate principles of accountability into implementable frameworks and guidance to promote good data governance in the industry. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zik. It's really inspiring to hear what you have been pursuing in Singapore. You know, I really appreciate this risk-based approach and protection by design, and you gave prominence to the issue of data ethics and data culture. And this lead me to think, you know, the data literacy concept need to be much broadened. It's not just about people's capacity to understand data and use data, but also the whole understanding of the value and accountability, the legal requirement, so that we can be all responsibly using data and be accountable for our actions. So thank you very much. We'll come back to you soon. Now, Malar, you know, you are deeply involved in the preparation of the WDR. I'm sure data governance is a critical component of this report. Tell us a bit about what you have uncovered during this process around data governance.
So the report hopes to make a compelling argument. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about how we're trying to build this vision. And we're trying to make a compelling argument supporting this ambitious vision for building these national data systems. We believe that this is very much needed now, especially with all the spotlight and data to help bridge the current equity gaps between the rich and the poor and also between countries. And again, to realize such a vision is a huge undertaking, especially for low-income countries that are suffering from high levels of poverty, fragility, and weak institutions. I mean, just a recently released bank report talked about more people being displaced into extreme poverty. I think the number was about 88 million, and sort of on a downside scenario, it could be 115 million. And also decades of remarkable progress in child and youth mortality are now being threatened. And the point I'm trying to make is that I think now fixing these systems has become even more important as data has become very fundamental to solving some of these toughest development problems. I think it's important to start mobilizing around this vision. And again, this cannot be accomplished without multi-stakeholder engagement models where governments, private sector, international organizations, civil societies, academic institutions, and individuals work together to resolve some of these complex issues that are talking about, for which I think more research and evidence base needs to be built. Another point I think that also needs to be considered is that there are massive differences in the current state of data affairs for countries across the world for realizing this vision. And so the report provides a maturity model approach for countries that takes into account local conditions and political economy considerations, along with, how you build these laws, in terms of how you build these laws and strengthen institutions. Maybe I'll end with like a few points on, what are some of the things we need to sort of work towards, and Zeke and some of my other panelists already touched upon them. I think it's of paramount importance to continue to educate policymakers that data is foundational for solving development challenges. I think it's important to show that we need to prioritize investments in strengthening these data systems as its impact is profound and it touches upon multiple sectors. The second is building this environment of data culture, especially in public sector. I think even to do experiment, when you want to experiment with new institutional models, or you're sort of discussing about laws that are so complex when it comes to antitrust and cross-border data flows. I think there's a certain amount when you need to actually, policymakers need to think about data. I mean, it needs to come as a second nature, right? It's not a separate thing you do. It needs to be central in sort of all your decision-making process. And Haishan, you said that, so it really does go beyond just building data. It's just not about just building data literacy and improving technical capacity, but you need to build this into the culture of performance. Like practices like HR or accounts. Data needs to be recognized as a central, what do you call it, talent profession by itself. And then again, the other thing is the WDR and governance already talks about this extensively, is investing in analog complements, in improving, I think we need to bring in more collaborative leadership. I think it starts from there. I think we need to, again, build leadership that works together to bring this whole of government approach to, in resolving some of these, in building solutions and resolving these problems. And the last I will end with is international cooperation and consensus, primarily on, I think, regulation harmonization that touches on trade taxation and competition policies. And this cooperation needs to take the interests of low and middle income countries, and it needs to be well represented. And in these discussions, as we see right now, that's not the case. So I'll end with this, and as we come back to the discussions, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malar. I can't wait to read the WDR, and I also look forward to the courage that WDR will take with it to offer the world some great new ideas to guide us. I just really appreciate the point you made. Now I hope the WDR will really make the case. We're no longer facing this false dilemma, whether we should invest in data governance and data empowerment, or we invest in saving lives, reducing poverty. Because unless we invest in data, we will not be able to achieve the step change in these other areas of development. So I hope the world will come together to recognize the foundational value that we will need to really pursue. So with that, let's move to our discussion among you. Let's focus on some of the issues that you have highlighted through your presentations. Maybe let me start with Rory, if you don't mind. As you know, the reality we're facing today is that governments are holding increasing amount of data about their population, including in countries with weak laws and institutions. So this has given rise to many opportunities as well as risks. How should data governance deal with this reality?
Thank you, Haishan. The Minister of Interior of a very large African country recently said, when talking about their new digital identification system, he said, the real thing here is the identification number you have. With that, you're on the data bank. Everything about you is there. We're going to have your DNA too. Even if you are in a car, I will know if you are the one in the car with your DNA. It's already captured, he said. You're already captured. You cannot run away anymore. So governments today have huge amounts of data. It's increasingly digital. That makes it easier to manipulate, easier to consolidate, easier to share, easier to give access to. easier, more vulnerable to being breached, of course, as well. And so with the opportunities of larger amounts of data and better understood data that come, and there are huge opportunities there because governments can make better policy decisions, better serve people, allocate public resources better, reduce fraudulent claims for social payments, deliver healthcare where it needs to be, where communities need it. It gives government deep knowledge about individuals' lives, however, and their political opinions, their social networks, their financial position. There are real tensions that have to be resolved. Governments typically hold data in silos. Traditionally, you'll have health data held within a health ministry or a health agency, and you'll have social protection data in that agency, food distribution in another. Some of them will be in international organizations, and yet the benefit of data is when you're able to cross-pollinate it and apply analytics to multiple different pools of data. And yet, the tension is that the more you do that, again, the more information the government has on individuals. So I think there are four basic things we really need to think about in addressing the opportunity and the risk here. You obviously need effective laws, and more countries are introducing that to impose a discipline of good data governance. And we're seeing those laws now bit by bit being applied. We're seeing the courts recently in India, Kenya, Jamaica, for example, striking down or suspending parts of very important digital initiatives of government, in those cases ID systems, because of lack of data protection. So we're seeing some push into some insistence on good legal standards. So we need more of that. We need then important technical addressing it through procurement processes. Every time governments purchasing more systems, we need cross-government guidance, protocols that make sure that all data collection, processing, storage, sharing, interoperability, that it'll have careful security controls, there won't be unauthorized access. So that needs to be baked in, to use Priya's phrase from before. We need good administrative measures within the organizations that handle data. So separation of duties, perhaps those who are handling collection of data from those who are managing authorization of transactions that use the data. And yet without overdoing it, because you can then over hierarchicalize or bureaucratize departments of government. So we need really more than anything to build cultures and ethics within government. And then lastly, we need institutional innovation along the lines that Jenny was talking about, new mechanisms where the rule of law may be weak, where government institutions may be weak, and yet you can still create something like a data trust, which can be a reliable mechanism for making data available for good use. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think this is really, this is fabulous what you just said. And I think it's a very natural segue into what I would like to ask Priya and Jenny. Priya, you have stressed that people have rights to data. And you also stressed, it's not just making this realization clear to everyone, but also really work together to find how. So can you speak a bit more about what are some of the effective ways to enable citizens to become aware of these rights and be able to exercise them?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think this is, so let me start with some World Bank research that shows people around the world care about data privacy and understanding how their data is used. So that we need to first and foremost debunk the myth that, there's some differences of opinion in how poor people or rich people or people from the global south or north think about data. And CGAP has shown that people will stand in lines longer for privacy preserving financial tools or even pay more for it. So it really does matter. And in terms of how to do it, I think we have to start with some core principles around what does it mean to, give people control and transparency. And I mentioned before that consent is broken. And rather than just saying, well, you know, consent's broken, we have to find some alternative, I actually would argue we need to kind of double down on consent, and instead of asking for people's permission to use their data once and for all, you know, in, let's say, terms and conditions, you know, consent can be more open and it can be granular, and most importantly, it can be revocable. And if you have kind of these principles that people can know how data is used and shared, and they can revoke access to their data at any point, then then you can imagine having data trusts and data fiduciaries and whatever on top of that, those principles kind of carrying out the preferences of individuals. But at any time, people have the right to kind of pull back, take their data elsewhere. And, you know, some of the things we're most excited about coming out of, you know, Mauritius and Estonia and India are these technological frameworks for data sharing that have transparency logs that, you know, show what data has been moved when and by whom, and kind of bake in permissions. Who has access to my income tax data? You know, it needs, those permissions should be baked in. And, you know, so a lot of these technological architectures are really enabling this kind of consent framework, but that revocability and that transparency that I described as being so needed.
No, thank you very much. Jenny, I'm sure by now you have realized that why we put you and Priya next to each other. Well, Priya is focusing on the individual right and individual ability to exercise that right. And you and ODI have been really emphasizing the importance of building institutions and building trust. So could you talk a little bit more about what are the most critical elements when it comes to building trust in data institutions? And also, what does sustainability look like, given how easy those trusts could be broken?
So I think I'll take as a starting point some of the pieces that Priya was talking about. You know, I completely agree. People care about the way in which data is used, that in ways that affect their lives and the lives of their friends and their family, and their communities and their environment. Right? These are important things that people get exercised about. What I feel is from the work that we have done and the work that I've seen is that the implications of data collection and use are extremely hard for anyone to handle. We don't know how data might be used in the future, and we cannot know how data might be used in the future. And the kinds of mechanisms that we have for controlling data through various, you know, different consent mechanisms and so on, they take time. Who puts in that kind of effort to manage their digital shadow when you just want to get on and live your lives, you know? And then these aspects of, as I say, data doesn't just affect us as individuals. Permissions that other people give about use of data that is about them affects us. And that means that what I give consent to is not it does not determine what data might be used in order to affect my life. The consent that I give affects my children, my family, my household, my community. And we're interconnected in these ways, which means that I think that we need these other kinds of mechanisms for really providing more collective forms of governance around data. And that's one of the reasons that we're so interested in data institutions as mechanisms for building that kind of collective consent around data, which again, I think that there are huge challenges around, but mechanisms like providing, you know, carrying out citizen juries and having representatives of communities in order to make those decisions, and doing all of that in very, very transparent and accountable ways, that and making sure that you have, you know, organizations that are really going to fight for the rights of people within those systems, I think are all part of the solution. In the work that we've been carrying out around data institutions, institutions, recognizing that data institutions play this incredible brokerage role around trust. They say that a provider is trustworthy. They say that a data user is trustworthy. So they themselves need to be trustworthy. And in our research around trust, communication is the real key to that. Proactive, open, transparent communication that can be challenged is the only way in which we get to that. We also think it's really interesting, Haishan, you mentioned, the role of the World Bank as a data institution. We're not talking about necessarily lots of new organizations here. We can build on the trust that existing organizations have. They need to recognize their role as data institutions, as data intermediaries in these contexts. And we also have to recognize that the individual actions of an organization, of a data institution, aren't enough on its own to build trust. The context of law, of enforcement of that law, of redress mechanisms, even of things like insurance and audits and certification are all part of building an environment that promotes trust in the handling of data. And then the sustainability comes in this other role, that when organizations have models for maintaining their revenue, maintaining themselves in order to be reliable providers of data, you also wonder whether the financial flows that they get bias the decisions that they make about who to share data with. And removing those kinds of conflicts between revenue model and the purpose of an institution is another way in which trust is really built. So again, I don't think any of us have really cookie cutter answers to how you do this well. And many of our examples are ones where we can point to where it's been done not well, right? Where trust has been lost and these things have failed. But that's why we have to continue to experiment and learn from new types, I think.
Sean, can I just respond briefly to that?
Yeah, sure, please.
I think maybe we were hoping that Jenny and I would have a raucous debate here about whether to invest in data institutions or people's rights. And I think what you're hearing is it's yes and.
Yeah,
exactly. We've seen, time and time again, fiduciaries who are meant to serve the interests of people fail, in that 2008 financial crisis, when it's ratings agencies and mortgage lenders and those types of things. There are these kind of intermediaries and fiduciaries kind of gone rogue, and you see that when people have responsibility or rights over their data, that they kind of fail to do so. So we're really trying to imagine this kind of ecosystem of trust that allows allows for people to have rights, but those rights to be kind of carried out more effectively through institutional arrangements and oversight that doesn't put all the burden on people.
Yeah, no, fantastic. No, thank you so much for coming in and make the point. We need both. That's why I think I love this discussion. I'm sure many people in the audience are also very intrigued by our discussion here and have a lot of questions that they wish to pose to all of you. But before we go to our audience, let's move to Zeke and Malar. Zeke, Singapore has been really moving very decisively and quickly when it comes to the new data governance. But has it been always a smooth ride? What are some of the lessons learned so far in your experience so that other countries who are really contemplating what they should do could watch out for? Could you share some thought on that?
Having a government agency like the agency that I'm in, the Infocom Media Development Authority, that is prepared to be open and to co-create. These frameworks that we talked about, we started off with an idea, but it is the openness to talk to industry, gathering and picking up the best ideas, and then putting them together. That's one way of building. The second is really, especially for our trusted data sharing framework, we actually ran a program where we, for a couple of years, where we told the industry to, that was prepared to, that was interested in data sharing, and said that if you've got issues, come, let's have a discussion, let's talk about what issues you're facing, right? And then we'll see what we can do. So we ran a regulatory sandbox alongside that as well. And then it is, having run that for about 18 months or so, right? We distilled our experience. We saw the common issues. People were struggling with the data valuation, and that was creating impasses, right? When people are trying to do data sharing, people were not sure about whether it's legal or not legal. People were not sure about how do you go about thinking about the data sharing. So we distilled all that, put it into a logical four-step framework, and then we gave it back to the market to say that this is how you can do it, and this is first version, right? Let's try. Let's continue working on this. Let's continue iterating, because we're gonna do this, right? So I think readiness of the market, right? They must have data, willingness to work together with the market to co-create, right? And then always that positive reinforcing feedback loop, taking the experience and putting it back into the market. That's, I think, the summation of our experience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I could just hear Malar scribbling down all the the insights that all of you have been sharing to benefit the WDR. But Malar, let's come to you. Talking about engaging with industry, and nobody have figured out, but it's about how we can continue to collaborate and iterate this process and strive for the better solutions. So, but through your experience with preparing for the WDR, what lessons about data-based businesses and market powers are we learning today? And how do this translate into developing countries?
Thank you, Haishan. And I think we're still sort of early in our analysis around the lessons, but I can sort of set up some of the thinking that's going on in the report. So first off, I think the data-driven platform businesses can enhance competition through more effective market intermediation, which allows smaller enterprises, as well as maybe lagging regions, to participate more widely in global markets and support greater product and process innovation. But however, powerful network externalities associated with digital platforms creates these market powers to be concentrated in a few large firms, making it difficult for startups to gain a foothold in the market. And as this has led to data-oriented companies becoming, I think, among the largest globally by market capitalization. And it has also led to widening inequality between countries and firms. And I think all of you are following a lot of the debate right now that's happening around, where antitrust authorities have begun investigating cases of anti-competitive practices by digital platforms. And also the increasing concerns of that the traditional tools of competition policy are not well suited to addressing competition issues in the digital data economy. For instance, I think the price impact of mergers may not be as relevant in sectors where services are provided free of charge, while non-price dimensions affecting quality of services, such as the degree of data protection provided, are becoming more important. Moreover, the scope of tacit collusion between firms may be greatly increased through the use of algorithms as well. So some of the ways in which I think, which is again still being considered and discussed, is in providing solutions to this include mandatory portability of personal data, more data sharing, interoperability, as well as looking at the limitations on the structure and operations of some of these large data-driven firms. But of course, I mean, I think this is an area of discussion and research that requires more attention and I think more debates, because there's still very limited evidence on the efficacy of such actions. And important questions remain, and the extent to which such remedies raise costs and stifle incentives to collect data. I'll probably sort of kind of stop with this because I'm also keen to see what other panelists have to say on this. It would be also important for us in the OEDR.
So with that, let's open to our audience to hear from them directly.